July 11, 1940. The summer air in Washington, D.C. was heavy and humid, and inside the offices of the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, a new specification document was typed, stamped, and distributed to 135 automobile manufacturers across the United States. The request was brief but extraordinary. It called for a quarter-ton 4x4 reconnaissance vehicle that could carry 3 men and their gear, weigh no more than 1,300 pounds, reach 50 miles per hour, and climb a 60% grade. The Army wanted one working prototype within 49 days and 70 more test units within 75 days after approval. No American company had ever produced such a machine. Light vehicles existed, small sedans, delivery trucks, even experimental scout cars, but none combined the speed, durability, and off-road capability that modern warfare now demanded. The Army's engineers knew what they wanted, but not how to build it. Their appeal went out at a moment when the world was changing faster than military bureaucracy could keep up. Europe was already at war. Nazi Germany's armored divisions had crushed Poland the previous fall and, in May 1940, overran France in 6 weeks. Britain now stood alone. The success of Germany's blitzkrieg demonstrated that mobility was as decisive as firepower. Tanks, half-tracks, and motorcycles allowed German troops to move with frightening speed. American observers realized that without comparable mobility, U.S. forces, still organized around horse cavalry and heavy trucks, would be hopelessly outmaneuvered in any future conflict. When the Quartermaster Corps sent out its request, most big manufacturers quietly ignored it. They were busy with profitable civilian lines and doubted that a small military contract justified the risk of an all-new design. Only one small company, nearly bankrupt, chose to respond. The American Bantam Car Company, located in Butler, Pennsylvania, had been producing miniature automobiles under license from the British Austin Motor Company since the early 1930s. Its cars were inexpensive but underpowered, and the Depression had nearly destroyed the firm. In 1940, Bantam employed fewer than 20 people in engineering and design. Yet its president, Frank Fenn, saw the Army's challenge as a final chance to save his company. On July 17, 1940, Fenn convinced a freelance engineer named Karl Probst to join the effort. Probst was an experienced designer who had worked for large firms such as Packard and had a reputation for methodical, practical engineering. Initially skeptical, Bantam's finances were shaky and the schedule absurd, he agreed after learning that his country needed the project completed at any cost. Probst sat down at his drawing board that same day. Within 5 days, he produced a complete set of blueprints for a vehicle unlike anything then on American roads. It used a compact 4-cylinder engine, a sturdy steel frame, and 4-wheel drive with a transfer case allowing high and low ranges. The body was simple and utilitarian: flat fenders, a fold-down windshield, no doors, and seats for 3. The emphasis was on function, not comfort. Every component was chosen for strength and ease of repair in the field. Bantam's small factory turned those drawings into reality almost immediately. Working in shifts around the clock, mechanics, welders, and machinists shaped steel, mounted axles, and assembled what they called the Bantam Reconnaissance Car, the BRC. On September 21, 1940, just 2 days before the deadline, the prototype rolled out of the Butler plant and onto a flatbed truck bound for the Army's testing ground at Camp Holabird, near Baltimore, Maryland. 2 days later, on September 23, it arrived under its own power, the small engine humming steadily. Army officers, mechanics, and curious soldiers gathered to watch the demonstration. The BRC looked tiny beside the heavy trucks parked nearby, but once the tests began, skepticism turned to admiration. The vehicle darted across rough terrain, climbed hills, and splashed through mud pits without hesitation. It could turn sharply and stop on steep grades. For the first time, the Army saw a lightweight vehicle that could go almost anywhere. The official test reports were enthusiastic. One observer wrote that the BRC exceeded all expectations and represents a most outstanding achievement for so small a concern. Yet a serious problem emerged. Bantam's plant lacked the capacity to produce the thousands of vehicles the Army envisioned. The Quartermaster Corps needed assurance of mass production, and Bantam simply could not provide it. Because national security demanded speed, the Army made a controversial decision. Without Bantam's full consent, it circulated the company's blueprints and performance data to two larger manufacturers, Willys Overland of Toledo, Ohio, and the Ford Motor Company of Dearborn, Michigan. Both were invited to build their own improved versions of the Bantam concept. In October 1940, Willys and Ford engineers began their work. The decision infuriated Bantam's executives, who felt robbed of their invention. But the government's priority was clear. America needed a reliable light vehicle before war reached its shores. At Willys Overland, Chief Engineer Delmar Barney Roos focused on increasing power. He installed the company's new 60-horsepower Go Devil engine, giving the small car remarkable torque and climbing ability. Ford's design team emphasized production simplicity, using pressed steel components and standardized parts that could be manufactured quickly on existing assembly lines. Both companies modified details, steering, seating, and body dimensions, but the overall concept remained unmistakably Bantam's. By November 1940, 3 prototypes stood ready for comparative testing at Camp Holabird: Bantam's updated BRC-60, the Willys Quad, and the Ford Pygmy. Over weeks of grueling trials, each was driven across obstacle courses, through deep mud and sand, over logs and trenches, and up steep inclines. Engines overheated, axles broke, and frames twisted, yet all 3 vehicles proved that the basic idea was sound. The Army's evaluators soon gravitated toward the Willys entry. Its stronger engine gave it superior performance, and its slightly wider stance improved stability. When weight reduction and standardization were complete, the final version received the designation Willys MB. To meet wartime demand, production was shared with Ford, whose nearly identical version became the Ford GPW. The 2 models used interchangeable parts and together formed the backbone of a new class of military transport. By early 1941, contracts were signed for thousands of units. The vehicle now had an official name that soldiers could remember easily, though its origin remains debated. Some believe Jeep derived from the Army's abbreviation GP for General Purpose Vehicle. Others claim it came from Eugene the Jeep, a magical creature from the popular Popeye comic strip known for going anywhere and doing anything. Whatever the source, the nickname stuck. The first mass-produced Jeeps began rolling out of Willys and Ford factories in February 1941. As the United States accelerated rearmament under the Lend-Lease program, early shipments went overseas to Allied forces fighting in North Africa and Europe. British and Soviet troops who received them praised the little machine's toughness and versatility. Each Jeep weighed roughly 2,300 pounds, far exceeding the Army's original weight limit, but proving that extra strength was essential. The flathead 4-cylinder Go Devil engine delivered 60 horsepower, enough to haul the vehicle, 3 men and supplies over terrain that would stop most trucks cold. Its top speed of 55 miles per hour allowed quick reconnaissance and dispatch missions. A simple canvas top offered minimal weather protection, and every surface was designed for easy maintenance. Bolts, not welds, held much of the frame together, enabling rapid field repairs with basic tools. As 1941 progressed, testing continued at bases across the United States. Soldiers quickly adopted the Jeep as their favorite vehicle. It could tow small artillery pieces, carry stretchers, mount machine guns, or serve as a mobile radio platform. Mechanics found it easy to service. Commanders valued its reliability. The Jeep soon appeared in every training film and military manual. When December 7, 1941 arrived, the day of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States officially entered World War II. Overnight, the need for Jeeps became urgent. Production expanded dramatically. Willys and Ford converted entire facilities to meet government quotas, and by the end of 1942, the assembly lines were turning out thousands every month. The Jeep goes to war. By January 1942, the assembly lines of Willys Overland in Toledo, Ohio, and Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan were running day and night under wartime contracts. America had entered the conflict only a month earlier, but already its industrial machine was transforming into what President Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. Among tanks, trucks, and aircraft, one of the smallest items on the list was proving to be one of the most essential: the quarter-ton 4x4 truck, officially designated the Willys MB and Ford GPW, universally known simply as the Jeep. Each vehicle emerged from the line in standard olive drab paint, its tools strapped to the sides, a shovel and axe mounted on the left panel, and a spare tire and jerry can bolted to the rear. The windshield folded down, the seats were bare canvas, and the dashboard contained only the most necessary gauges. Simplicity was its genius. Mechanics could strip and reassemble an entire Jeep using basic wrenches, and parts from Ford and Willys models were fully interchangeable. Production goals that once seemed ambitious quickly multiplied. In 1941, the Army had ordered about 16,000 Jeeps. By the end of 1942, contracts called for more than 150,000 units, and by 1945, total production would exceed 640,000. At its peak, one Jeep rolled off an American assembly line every 2 minutes. While factories roared, ships carried thousands of crated vehicles across the Atlantic and Pacific. Early in 1942, Jeeps arrived in North Africa, accompanying General Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army and General Dwight D. Eisenhower's American 2nd Corps. The deserts of Egypt and Tunisia provided the harshest possible testing ground: scorching heat by day, freezing cold by night. Sand that clogged radiators and differentials, yet the little 4x4 performed reliably. British officers, accustomed to heavier trucks, were astonished. A Jeep could dash forward for reconnaissance, carry messages between units, or tow an anti-tank gun through sand where even tracked vehicles bogged down. Mechanics improvised shade covers and fitted extra canteens to the fenders. Soldiers often described it as a soldier's best friend. In the Pacific Theater, the terrain was entirely different: jungle, coral, and swamp. Yet the Jeep proved just as capable. Marines landing on Guadalcanal in August 1942 used them to haul ammunition and wounded men through thick mud. The light weight allowed soldiers to build improvised bridges from coconut logs. 20 Marines could lift a Jeep out of a shell hole by hand. Army engineers found additional uses. They fitted some vehicles with radio sets, others with wire reels, stretchers, or even recoilless rifles. The Jeep became the universal platform of the Allied war effort. Its standardized design simplified logistics. A single crate of spare parts could serve any unit, anywhere in the world. In 1943, as production reached full capacity, Jeeps began arriving in enormous numbers in Britain in preparation for the invasion of continental Europe. On training grounds across England, American GIs practiced driving them in convoy, learning how to maintain engines, replace wheel bearings, and use the low-range gear for climbing steep terrain. Military instructors emphasized the Jeep's versatility. It could function as command transport, ambulance, fire truck, field kitchen, or artillery tractor. Soldiers also developed a deep affection for the vehicle's personality. They gave them nicknames, painted pin-ups on the hoods, and decorated dashboards with photographs from home. Despite its utilitarian design, the Jeep represented independence. the ability to move freely over terrain that previously confined men to trenches and roads. On July 9, 1943, during the Allied invasion of Sicily, jeeps were among the first vehicles to roll onto the beaches. Paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne had their jeeps dropped by glider, lashed to wooden pallets. Within minutes of landing, they were driving across enemy territory, carrying officers, radios, and supplies. German commanders reported surprise at the mobility of American units. Small columns of jeeps appeared unexpectedly behind their lines, disrupting communications and supply routes. By late 1943, the jeep's reputation was legendary. War correspondents called it the mechanical mule and the war's greatest soldier. General Eisenhower would later write that the United States had three decisive tools of victory: the DC-3 transport plane, the landing craft, and the jeep. As the Allies prepared for the invasion of France, hundreds of thousands of jeeps were shipped to staging areas in southern England. Mechanics waterproofed engines and distributors so that the vehicles could drive directly off landing craft through several feet of water. Each was equipped with extra fuel cans, rope, and rations for the journey inland after the landings. When June 6, 1944, D-Day arrived, jeeps were among the first vehicles to touch the sands of Normandy. Photographs taken on Omaha and Utah beaches show them weaving between craters and wreckage, carrying medics, engineers, and communications officers. Many were hit by shell fire, but replacements poured in from ships anchored offshore. Within days, columns of jeeps were moving supplies up narrow French roads, linking infantry battalions with armored units and command posts. The vehicle's influence extended beyond battlefield efficiency. It transformed battlefield culture. Officers who once issued orders from behind lines could now reach forward positions quickly. Dispatch riders who once relied on motorcycles, unreliable in mud and snow, switched to jeeps. Evacuation of wounded soldiers became faster, saving countless lives. In every theater, mobility meant survival, and no other vehicle delivered it with such consistency. The legacy of the jeep. May 8, 1945. In Europe, the guns finally fell silent. Crowds flooded the streets of London, Paris, and New York in celebration of Victory in Europe Day. Amid the parades and flags, thousands of jeeps rolled through the liberated capitals. Small, unarmored, dusty from months of war, yet instantly recognizable. They had carried soldiers across deserts, beaches, forests, and bomb-shattered cities. Now they carried them home. The image was everywhere. A young American GI perched on the hood of a Willys MB, waving to cheering civilians. Children climbing onto the fenders. Generals standing in the back to salute troops. The jeep, designed in desperation 5 years earlier, had become a global emblem of freedom. As the last battles ended in the Pacific in August 1945, jeeps were already part of nearly every Allied campaign. On Okinawa and Iwo Jima, they had hauled ammunition and wounded men through volcanic ash. In Burma, they had crossed narrow jungle tracks. In the Soviet Union, more than 50,000 Lend-Lease jeeps had served with Red Army reconnaissance units. From the snows of the Ardennes to the rice paddies of China, the same small machine had proven indispensable. The statistics were staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, Willys Overland produced roughly 360,000 MB models, while Ford manufactured about 280,000 GPWs. Added together, the total reached over 640,000 vehicles, more than any other light four-wheel drive in history up to that point. Including spare parts and component kits, the figure approached 700,000. When the war ended, enormous depots filled with surplus jeeps stood in England, France, the Philippines, and the Pacific Islands. Many were sold or given to Allied nations rebuilding their economies. Others were auctioned to civilians for a few $100s each. Farmers, doctors, missionaries, and explorers eagerly snapped them up. They discovered what soldiers already knew: the little 4x4 could go almost anywhere. At Willys headquarters in Toledo, company executives recognized that the Jeep's reputation offered an unprecedented opportunity. Even before VJ Day, Willys engineers were redesigning the military MB for civilian use. They removed the blackout lights, added a tailgate, and introduced a power takeoff shaft to operate farm machinery. On July 17, 1945, Willys filed the trademark for the name Jeep. That same year, the first civilian version, the CJ2A, CJ for civilian Jeep, entered production. It looked nearly identical to the wartime model, but was marketed as the Universal. Advertisements showed farmers plowing fields, ranchers herding cattle, and construction crews towing trailers. The company's slogan proclaimed, "The sun never sets on the Jeep." Farmers across rural America quickly adopted it. Unlike tractors, the CJ2A could travel on public roads and still power a saw, pump, or generator through its rear drive shaft. Mechanics praised its rugged simplicity. Spare parts were abundant, and ex-servicemen already knew how to repair them. In the late 1940s, surplus military Jeeps also helped rebuild war-torn nations. In France and Italy, they hauled building materials through ruined streets. In the Netherlands, they transported doctors and supplies across flooded dikes after the winter of 1944–45. In Japan, under American occupation, Jeeps became the first vehicles of the new police and postal services. The transformation of the vehicle from instrument of war to tool of peace was swift. By 1948, Willys exported Jeeps to more than 100 countries. The company's advertising films, shown in cinemas and trade fairs, portrayed the Jeep as the new pioneer, conquering wilderness and connecting remote communities. The post-war years also saw the beginning of licensed production abroad. In 1948, Mahindra & Mahindra in India assembled its first batch of CJ2As under license, launching an industry that would endure for decades. In 1953, the Japanese firm Mitsubishi began local production for domestic use. In France, Hotchkiss manufactured thousands of military versions for the French army. Each factory adapted the design to local needs, but the core concept, a small, durable four-wheel drive vehicle, remained unchanged. Meanwhile, in the United States, Willys introduced new variants: the CJ3A in 1949, the CJ3B in 1953 with a taller hood to house the improved Hurricane engine, and the CJ5 in 1955 based on the updated military M38A1. Each model carried forward the essential DNA of the wartime Jeep. Culturally, the Jeep became embedded in post-war imagination. Hollywood films about the war invariably included Jeeps bounding over muddy roads. Newsreels of reconstruction projects showed them pulling trailers or carrying dignitaries through rubble. In peacetime parades, veterans drove restored MBs draped in flags. The machine that had once symbolized battle now represented freedom of movement and democratic resilience. From a technical standpoint, the Jeep established design principles that shaped future four-wheel drives. Its short wheelbase, high ground clearance, and part-time four-wheel drive system became the template for later utility vehicles. The British Land Rover, launched in 1948, and the Japanese Toyota Land Cruiser, introduced in the early 1950s, both drew direct inspiration from the wartime Jeep. Military evolution continued as well. The U.S. Army, recognizing the MB's limitations in payload and stability, commissioned successors such as the M38 and later the M151 MUTT, but none captured the same affection. For 2 generations of soldiers, the word Jeep became shorthand for any small military truck, regardless of manufacturer. During the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, Jeeps once again appeared on battlefields, now fitted with radios and stretchers, climbing the steep hills of the Korean peninsula, much as they had once climbed the slopes of Sicily and Normandy. Photographs from Vietnam a decade later still showed their familiar silhouette, even as helicopters began to dominate modern mobility. By the mid-1950s, Willys Overland had been absorbed by Kaiser Motors, forming Kaiser Jeep, which expanded the civilian line into station wagons and pickup trucks. In 1970, the brand changed hands again, sold to American Motors Corporation. Through all corporate transitions, the Jeep name remained untouchable, a registered trademark recognized worldwide. The numbers told their own story. By the end of the 1950s, more than 1 million Jeeps, military and civilian, had been produced globally. They served on farms, in mines, at Antarctic research stations, and in United Nations peacekeeping missions. No other vehicle in history had reached so many different terrains or purposes in so short a time. In historical retrospect, the Jeep represented a technological turning point. It embodied the principle of total standardization, interchangeable parts, simple maintenance, and adaptability for multiple roles. It also illustrated the collaboration of industry and government at a scale previously unseen. Bantam's original concept, refined by Willys and Ford, mass-produced under wartime pressure, then democratized for global use. Preserved wartime correspondence reveals that senior commanders understood the vehicle's symbolic power even during the conflict. General Eisenhower reportedly stated that the Jeep, the Dakota, and the landing craft were the three tools that won the war. His remark was not hyperbole. The Jeep enabled mobility, and mobility enabled victory. Today, more than 80 years after that first prototype rolled into Camp Holabird, surviving wartime Jeeps appear in museums and vintage rallies worldwide. Restored to their olive-drab finish, they remain instantly recognizable. Their design seems almost primitive by modern standards. No doors, no electronics, no comfort. Yet their presence evokes an era when simplicity and reliability shaped history. The legacy extends far beyond machinery. The Jeep became a metaphor for perseverance. It symbolized a generation that faced global war, endured hardship, and emerged to rebuild. Every restored Jeep that rattles to life at a veterans parade is a reminder of that continuity. From the deserts of North Africa to the streets of post-war Europe, from rice paddies in Asia to farms in the American Midwest, the same mechanical heartbeat echoed. A small four-cylinder engine, a gearbox clicking into low range, and wheels gripping the earth. It was the sound of determination. And so the vehicle born out of a 49-day emergency contract in the anxious summer of 1940 outlived empires, ideologies, and the war that created it. It bridged the line between military necessity and civilian freedom. The Jeep not only won a war, it defined a century.